There's a truth most people never hear because it doesn't shout. It hums in the silence, pulses behind what we call matter, and operates not on the scale of atoms, but in the mysterious terrain beneath them. Beneath every chair, every hand, every thought, there's something much stranger going on. This isn't a metaphor. It's the framework modern physics uses to describe everything: quantum field theory. You might have heard that quantum mechanics is weird. Things exist in two places at once, particles pop into being from nowhere, and observation changes outcomes. But that's only the start. Quantum field theory, or QFT, doesn't just accept this weirdness, it builds the very structure of the universe on it. It claims that particles aren't fundamental. Instead, everything is made of fields, continuous, invisible layers that ripple through all of existence. The device you're watching this on, the air between, none of it is made of solid little building blocks. It's all vibrations in fields. Now here's the twist. This isn't just about physics. Some of the most provocative thinkers in science have started asking, if matter and energy arise from these fields, what about the mind? What if consciousness, long the territory of philosophers and psychologists, is also woven into this unseen network of fields? This video isn't just about the equations or the elegant mathematics behind QFT. It's about a possibility that redefines the ground we stand on. That what we think of as the external world and our internal experience aren't separate. They may both be different expressions of the same deeper fabric. In the coming moments, we'll lay the foundation for this idea by breaking down what QFT is without jargon, without mysticism. You'll understand how this theory changed our understanding of reality and where it starts to hint at something more, a connection between mind and matter, between observer and observed. Then we'll move into more challenging terrain. We'll explore how concepts like superposition and entanglement could relate to the way consciousness operates. We'll question the idea of individuality because in a world of fields, boundaries are illusions. We'll examine theories that suggest consciousness may not be produced by the brain but may instead be a fundamental aspect of the universe. Later, we'll look at where this is going. From quantum neuroscience to the far edges of philosophy, researchers are beginning to trace the outlines of a new map, one where thought and field, brain and cosmos, aren't separate entities but reflections of each other. This isn't science fiction. This is where the frontier of physics and consciousness research is heading. And by the end of this journey, you'll see why quantum field theory may not only explain the material universe, it may also be the key to understanding consciousness itself. If someone told you the universe is made of particles, they'd only be half right. That old view, atoms made of protons, neutrons, electrons, isn't false, but it's incomplete. It's like saying a symphony is just a collection of notes. Technically true, but it misses the whole point. Quantum field theory doesn't concern itself with particles as the starting point. Instead, it begins with something more abstract and far-reaching: fields. These are not the same as classical fields like magnetic or gravitational ones you might have learned about in school. These quantum fields are fundamental. Every type of particle is a ripple, a quantized excitation, in its corresponding field. Let's take the electron. There isn't just one electron bouncing around. There's an electron field stretched across the entire universe. When a measurement is made or an electron interacts with something, a localized ripple appears in that field. That ripple is what we detect as the electron. But the field is always there, underlying it all. This applies to every particle. Photon, ripple in the electromagnetic field. Quark, ripple in the quark field. Even the famed Higgs boson is just a bump in the Higgs field. These fields overlap, interact, and together form a vast, dynamic web, the true architecture of reality. Now, here's where it gets even more fascinating. These fields aren't passive. They're not just sitting around waiting for something to happen. They fluctuate constantly, even in what we would call a vacuum. That empty space is teeming with activity, with fields dancing just beneath the threshold of detection. These aren't poetic exaggerations. Quantum fluctuations are real and measurable. In fact, they're part of why atoms hold together and why stars don't collapse. They are the hum behind the curtain. And the curtain itself? That's space-time. Quantum field theory is built within it, but modern theoretical physics, especially approaches like quantum gravity, suggest that even space-time may emerge from more fundamental field-like structures. The idea that space and time themselves are not fundamental but born from deeper dynamics is now a serious area of study. But what's critical here is that QFT doesn't just describe the universe. It unifies it. Before QFT, scientists had to work with separate models for forces and particles. QFT says, no more separation. Forces like electromagnetism arise from the exchange of particles, which are themselves field excitations. Everything is field. Forces, matter, interactions all emerge from the same set of principles. The elegance of this unification is striking. It allows quantum electrodynamics, QED, to predict the magnetic moment of the electron with astonishing accuracy. So precise that it agrees with experiments to more than 10 decimal places. No theory in the history of science has been this accurate. But this accuracy doesn't make QFT cold or lifeless. Quite the opposite. It suggests something profound. That nature itself operates on patterns of vibration, interference, resonance. In other words, the universe behaves not like a machine, but like a kind of symphony, complex, interwoven, and fundamentally alive in its rhythm. This leads us into a very intriguing implication. If reality is composed of fields, and if these fields are in a constant state of interaction and motion, then everything you experience is part of that interaction. Your body, your thoughts, your sensations, they are not exceptions to this field-based view. They are expressions of it. This challenges the classical boundary between object and observer. You are not a detached entity observing a separate world. You are a localized region of fields experiencing and interacting with other regions. In this sense, the observer is embedded within the observed. And that starts to bring us toward the intersection of QFT and consciousness. Some physicists and philosophers argue that this convergence is inevitable. The mind, traditionally treated as a separate domain, must eventually be addressed within the framework of physical theory. And if QFT is the most accurate physical theory we've ever developed, then it's the natural place to look. But we must be careful. QFT doesn't automatically explain consciousness, at least not yet. What it does is provide a new way to approach it. It allows us to think in terms of fields rather than objects, processes rather than substances, patterns rather than parts. It also introduces the idea of non-locality. Quantum entanglement, predicted by quantum field theories and confirmed in countless experiments, shows that particles, and by extension, fields, can be correlated across vast distances instantaneously. This isn't magic or sci-fi. It's been observed. The fields that make up our universe do not respect the tidy boundaries of space in the way classical physics would have liked. And that idea will become important as we explore consciousness later. Another important idea in QFT is the vacuum state, not a void, but the lowest energy state of a field. Even this ground state is not truly empty. It seethes with activity. Virtual particles constantly appear and disappear. This active nothingness challenges our basic intuitions. It shows us that reality is not what it seems, and that hidden layers are always in play. So, when we say that QFT is the foundation of everything, it's not a metaphor. It's the literal scaffolding of reality. Matter, energy, forces, space, time, all are emergent from fields. And because QFT provides the most fundamental known description of physical phenomena, it offers the best lens we currently have for examining deeper mysteries, including the one closest to all of us, consciousness. In the next part, we'll explore that intersection in more detail. We'll look at how the phenomena described by QFT, superposition, entanglement, field fluctuation, might relate to the qualities of consciousness that have puzzled scientists and philosophers for centuries. But for now, the key idea is this: beneath every experience, behind every thought, within every cell, the fields are at work. The quantum field isn't just out there, it's also within. And that changes everything. Once the concept of quantum fields has settled in, a more provocative question naturally follows. If everything is built on quantum fields, matter, energy, space, then where does that leave consciousness? Is the mind just a strange side effect of electrical signals in a brain, or could it, too, be woven into this field-based reality? To begin, it helps to acknowledge the challenge. Consciousness has resisted explanation for centuries. It doesn't behave like other measurable phenomena. It can't be located under a microscope or isolated in a test tube. You know it's real because you're experiencing it right now. But science has always struggled to define it, much less explain it. Most current models reduce it to neural activity. That's useful but incomplete. It describes the mechanics, not the essence. Quantum field theory invites a different kind of framework. One that doesn't begin with particles or circuits, but with patterns of vibration, interference, and probability. And from this angle, several key phenomena stand out as bridges between the quantum world and conscious experience. The first is entanglement. In QFT, entanglement is not an exception, it's a feature. Two particles that interact can become entangled, meaning their properties are linked in such a way that measuring one immediately reveals information about the other, no matter how far apart they are. This correlation isn't carried by any signal. It happens faster than light could travel. It's as if, once connected, their identities are shared. This concept has led some researchers to speculate that the brain might exhibit forms of quantum entanglement, especially across neural networks. There is no definitive proof yet, but several quantum biology studies have identified entangled states in biological systems, including proteins and even photosynthesis processes. If entanglement can exist in organic systems, the door is open. More than that, entanglement challenges the idea of separateness. Classical physics draws hard lines between one object and another, one observer and the observed. But quantum field theories show us that those lines can blur. Fields don't begin and end in the tidy way particles do. They overlap, superimpose, and influence each other across distance. That's not a metaphor. That's the fabric of reality. This naturally leads to superposition, another cornerstone of quantum theory. In quantum systems, particles can exist in multiple states at once. It's only when observed that one state becomes real. This seems bizarre until you understand what's being said. Reality is not fixed until interaction occurs. In a sense, the field doesn't settle on a configuration until it's probed, until it's engaged. And that raises an important question. What role does the observer play? Here's where things get fascinating. In standard quantum theory, observation collapses the wave function, the mathematical description of all possible outcomes, into a single state. QFT reframes this slightly by working with operator-valued fields and expectations, but the principle remains. Measurement alters what's being measured. Now consider this. If observation changes reality at the quantum level, then the act of perception is not passive. It is active. And if perception shapes reality, even in minute ways, then consciousness isn't just along for the ride. It's participating. It's part of the machinery that defines the world. This is not a fringe idea. It's known as the observer effect, and while it doesn't suggest that reality is a dream or an illusion, it does imply that the universe doesn't unfold entirely on its own. There's a relational quality to it. The field becomes what it is partly through how it's engaged, through how it's perceived. This leads to a broader speculation that perhaps consciousness and the quantum field are not entirely separate phenomena. Perhaps they are two faces of a deeper reality. This would mean that the mind isn't generated by the brain in the way steam is produced by boiling water. Instead, the brain could be seen as a kind of interface, tuning into or interacting with fields that already contain the informational potential of conscious states. In this view, consciousness might be field-dependent rather than structure-dependent. It doesn't arise purely from the architecture of neurons, but from the interaction between biological structures and the fields they're embedded in. This would explain why so many features of consciousness, unity, continuity, intentionality, don't map easily onto classical physics. It also reframes the question of self. We tend to think of consciousness as isolated. Your mind is yours, mine is mine. But if the fields that underlie all phenomena are interconnected, then consciousness may not be as individual as we think. There may be localizations, just as there are localized field excitations, but the source, the substrate, could be shared. This doesn't require mysticism. It simply means the field view implies non-locality, and if consciousness arises through these fields, it may also exhibit non-local features. That could explain phenomena like synchronicity, sudden insights, or even the experience of unity reported in deep meditation, not as metaphysical claims, but as possibilities within a field-based framework. So where does the science stand? In neuroscience, the leading models are still materialist. They look at brain regions, signal pathways, and synaptic firing. These models are practical and powerful. They guide treatments, technologies, and research, but they rarely ask what consciousness is, only how it behaves. That gap has invited new models, like the orchestrated objective reduction theory by Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, which proposes that quantum processes inside microtubules in neurons could give rise to conscious experience. This theory is controversial, but it's one of the few that tries to bridge the gap between quantum mechanics and subjective awareness. Other scientists are exploring whether consciousness might be a fundamental aspect of the universe, not derived from matter but existing alongside it, akin to mass or charge. This idea, sometimes called panpsychism, is not new. It has roots in ancient philosophy. But now, with the framework of QFT, it takes on new meaning. If everything is field, and if fields can encode and transmit information, then consciousness might be an intrinsic property of the field itself. This also resonates with recent work in quantum information theory, where information is treated as more fundamental than matter. Fields don't just carry energy, they carry data. And consciousness may be the process by which certain complex configurations of information become self-aware. Let's pause and connect the dots. 1. QFT describes everything as fields, continuous, interacting, vibrating. 2. Consciousness resists reduction to classical mechanisms and shows signs of non-local, observer-dependent behavior. 3. Certain features of consciousness, unity, immediacy, subjectivity, match qualities of quantum systems more than classical ones. 4. Some models propose that consciousness may not emerge from the brain but from interactions with the quantum field itself. This doesn't mean QFT has solved consciousness. It hasn't, but it provides a structure that could accommodate it, one that allows consciousness to be an active, integrated part of the cosmos, not just a byproduct of chemistry. There's also a philosophical implication here. If consciousness arises from the same field-like substrate as matter, then the dualism between mind and body starts to break down. There's no longer a need to choose between physicalism and idealism, between the material world and the world of thought. They are aspects of a unified reality, experienced from different angles. And this unification may be the most radical part of all. Because if your thoughts and the quantum field share a common origin, then your experience is not separate from reality. It is a way the universe knows itself. You are not a passive observer, you are a node in the network, a locus of awareness shaped by and shaping the field in return. In that light, consciousness is not just a mystery to be solved. It's a window into the underlying pattern that links all things. Quantum field theory has brought us closer to this pattern than any other framework in science. And what it reveals is not just a new physics, but the possibility of a new understanding of self, of mind, of reality itself. In the next part, we'll follow this thread further. We'll examine where current models fall short, what it means to suggest that consciousness may extend beyond the physical brain, and how these ideas could change everything, from our understanding of death to the nature of existence. So far, we've explored how quantum field theory reframes reality as an interconnected tapestry of vibrating fields, and how this opens a path toward understanding consciousness not as an isolated, brain-bound process, but as something that may be deeply interwoven with the very structure of the universe. Now, the question shifts. If consciousness is field-related and potentially non-local, does it truly belong within the boundaries of the physical realm? Or is there something else, something beyond what is traditionally considered physical? To answer that, we must first confront the core tension. Quantum field theory excels at describing particles, forces, and energy exchanges. It handles interactions with staggering precision. But consciousness doesn't behave like any of these things. It has no mass, no measurable charge, no known spatial coordinates. It is not emitted, absorbed, or exchanged. Instead, it is experienced. It is presence itself. This has always posed a challenge to scientific explanation. The physical sciences are built on models that describe the observable and the measurable. But subjective experience, the felt quality of being, doesn't fit into these models. It isn't just hard to describe using equations. It actively resists quantification. Despite this, many researchers are trying to develop theoretical bridges. One of the most discussed is the notion of quantum consciousness. This doesn't refer to consciousness simply influenced by quantum phenomena. It suggests a more radical idea, that consciousness may emerge from quantum field dynamics directly, not as a side effect but as an intrinsic property. It implies that fields themselves may possess protoconscious attributes, and that complex configurations of those fields, like those present in biological brains, give rise to awareness. The most famous theory in this domain is the orchestroir orchestrated objective reduction theory mentioned earlier. It proposes that consciousness originates from quantum computations taking place within microtubules, tiny structural components inside neurons. These computations, it argues, are orchestrated across the brain and collapse in a way that produces conscious moments. Critics argue that the warm, noisy environment of the brain would prevent such delicate quantum events from surviving long enough to matter. But newer research in quantum biology suggests that nature may have found ways to maintain coherence in warm systems, like what's seen in avian navigation and plant photosynthesis. Even so, orchestroir is just one hypothesis. It doesn't answer the deeper question: why should quantum processes feel like anything at all? Why should a particular field state or waveform have a corresponding internal experience? This is the core of what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. Quantum field theory doesn't solve this problem directly, but it reframes it. If the universe is fundamentally built from fields, then perhaps consciousness emerges not at the level of particles or molecules, but from the configuration and resonance of those fields. Under this framework, it isn't the brain itself that generates consciousness. It may be more accurate to say the brain transduces it, much like a radio tunes into invisible signals. In other words, the brain may not be a factory of mind. It may be an interface. This model allows for the possibility that consciousness is not confined within the skull but may interact with, or even originate from, the broader quantum field. This doesn't mean it floats free of biology. It means biology is a conduit, not the source. To explore that, let's consider a simple analogy. Take a magnetic field. You cannot see it directly, but you can observe its effects. Iron filings align along invisible lines of force. The field is real, though intangible. Now imagine consciousness as a kind of field effect, a pattern that expresses itself through the structures of the brain but is not limited to them. The brain is the iron filings. Consciousness is the field that shapes them. This theory pushes us into deeper territory, one where consciousness might not only extend beyond the individual brain, but potentially beyond the material altogether. That's a bold claim, but consider what it implies. If consciousness is an emergent property of field interactions, then it could persist independently of any specific physical structure. That doesn't mean personal identity survives bodily death in the traditional sense. But it does suggest that the field configurations that gave rise to experience may not vanish entirely. They may transform, disperse, or merge with broader patterns. Consciousness, in this light, might not be destroyed. It might change form. This is speculative, of course, but it's grounded in the logic of QFT, which describes particles not as permanent things but as excitations, temporary, localized ripples in a deeper continuum. If a person is ultimately a complex configuration of those ripples, matter, energy, awareness, then the end of that configuration is not an annihilation, but a return to the field. This idea resonates with ancient philosophical traditions, but now it's being examined through a new lens, one that doesn't require mysticism to propose continuity beyond the body. It's not about spirits or souls. It's about field dynamics. And it's a serious area of inquiry for some of the most forward-thinking physicists and philosophers working today. Still, it's essential to acknowledge the limitations. Quantum field theory wasn't built to answer questions about awareness. Its equations don't predict inner experience. It's a tool for understanding interactions, not introspection. But like any powerful framework, its boundaries eventually intersect with mysteries it wasn't designed to address. This is where the science meets the edge. It's not a place of certainty. It's a place of possibility, of open questions. One of those questions is whether consciousness is fundamental or emergent. If it's emergent, then given the right conditions, enough complexity, enough coherence, awareness will naturally arise. But if it's fundamental, then it may not arise at all. It may simply be expressed. This leads to a profound implication. Consciousness might be a basic feature of the universe, just like space, time, or energy. It could be present in varying degrees throughout the entire field-based structure of reality. From this perspective, the cosmos doesn't produce consciousness. The cosmos is conscious in some distributed, non-human way. Our minds are local expressions of that deeper principle. This idea is not widely accepted in mainstream science, but it is increasingly discussed, not because of ideology, but because materialist models have hit a wall. They explain behavior, not being. And when you follow the logic of QFT far enough, you start to question whether the sharp boundary between mind and matter really holds. The deeper you go, the more you see that what we call physical is itself a kind of abstraction, a set of probabilities, a statistical interpretation of field interactions. What we call mental is simply another mode of experience. Both arise within the same underlying framework. They are different aspects of one unified process. And that process isn't limited to 3 dimensions or linear time. QFT suggests that particles, and therefore all matter, exist in a probabilistic haze until interaction occurs. The implications for time and causality are profound. Events don't unfold in a rigid sequence. The future influences the past through the entangled structure of the field. What does this mean for consciousness? It suggests that awareness may not be trapped in the present moment, as we experience it. It may be part of a broader field-based topology of time and space, with moments linked non-locally. This could explain why memory, anticipation, and intuitive insight often feel nonlinear. Consciousness may have access to a deeper layer of temporal structure. So when we talk about consciousness existing beyond the physical realm, it's not a claim about spirits or alternate dimensions. It's a statement about the limitations of current physical models. QFT reveals a world that is far more dynamic, interdependent, and strange than any classical theory. It points toward a picture of reality in which consciousness is not an anomaly, but a key feature, one that may stretch beyond the skull, beyond the body, even beyond time as we know it. If that sounds dramatic, consider this. Every major scientific revolution has expanded the boundaries of what we consider real. From a flat Earth to a spherical one, from a static universe to an expanding one, from solid matter to vibrating fields. Each shift reveals that our assumptions were too small. We may be standing at another threshold now, one where the next shift is not about space or matter, but about awareness itself. In the final parts of this video, we'll explore what this could mean for science, technology, ethics, and the future. Because once consciousness is no longer locked inside the brain, everything else begins to shift. Reality itself begins to look different, and the way we relate to ourselves, to each other, and to the universe may never be the same again. At this point, we've seen how quantum field theory reshapes our understanding of the universe, not just in terms of matter and energy, but in terms of consciousness itself. Now we shift our focus toward where this convergence is leading. Because while the theory offers us a new lens, it also opens up an entire frontier, one filled with questions, risks, and stunning possibilities. Across the world, researchers are applying quantum concepts to areas once considered beyond the scope of physics. Consciousness, once left to philosophy and psychology, is now at the heart of experimental and theoretical science. This shift isn't based on vague metaphors or poetic speculation. It's driven by real data, real equations, and real discoveries. Take quantum biology, for example. This emerging field is demonstrating that quantum effects aren't confined to particle accelerators or vacuum chambers. They play a central role in life itself. In processes as critical as photosynthesis, avian navigation, and even human olfaction, we see evidence of coherence, tunneling, and entanglement. These phenomena allow biological systems to operate with a precision and efficiency classical physics can't explain. This matters because it suggests that life is not just compatible with quantum phenomena, it may be fundamentally reliant on them. And if life uses quantum rules to function, then consciousness, arguably the most complex feature of life, may be structured by those same principles. Enter neuroquantology, a field still in its infancy but rapidly growing. Here, scientists are investigating how quantum events might influence neural processing. Some focus on coherence patterns in the brain, searching for quantum signatures in EEG data. Others are developing models of cognition that incorporate superposition and collapse into decision-making frameworks. A particularly fascinating concept emerging from this research is that of quantum cognition. This model doesn't claim that thoughts are particles or that neurons are teleporting information. Instead, it proposes that mental states behave in ways similar to quantum systems, probabilistic, context-dependent, and capable of being altered simply through observation. These ideas are supported by behavioral studies showing that human decision-making often violates classical logic, but can be described accurately using quantum probability models. Now pair that with quantum field theory's core insight, everything that exists arises from underlying interacting fields. When these two streams of inquiry meet, quantum cognition and field theory, we get a provocative idea. Consciousness might not merely reflect brain activity. It might be the dynamic resonance between biological systems and universal quantum fields. This is not just a theoretical curiosity. It's leading to tangible experiments. In laboratories equipped with femtosecond lasers and quantum sensors, scientists are probing the brain's electromagnetic activity at finer and finer scales. They're looking for coherence, patterns of synchrony that might suggest the presence of field-based structures or fluctuations indicative of quantum effects. Elsewhere, physicists and mathematicians are working to develop quantum field models that incorporate variables for awareness, not as a force, but as an informational state or potential within field dynamics. These models are speculative, but they're grounded in the same equations used to describe known phenomena. The hope is that by expanding the framework slightly, we might uncover new symmetries or solutions that include the phenomenon of consciousness. Parallel to these efforts is the rise of quantum computing, a technology that doesn't just harness quantum properties, but is built on them. These machines process information using qubits, which exist in multiple states simultaneously. That's not just faster computing. It's an entirely different paradigm, one that resembles the complexity and ambiguity of human thought more closely than any binary system ever could. What happens when quantum computing intersects with consciousness research? We get a new kind of interface, one where systems can handle uncertainty, contradiction, and parallel processing in ways that mimic aspects of the mind. The long-term implications are staggering. We're talking about machines that could potentially model aspects of awareness, not through brute force algorithms, but by resonating with the field structures that underlie cognition. Of course, with that possibility comes a host of ethical questions. What does it mean to simulate consciousness? How would we know if a system was truly aware or merely mimicking awareness? These are not abstract problems, they're rapidly approaching realities. As our understanding deepens, the line between biological and artificial consciousness may blur in ways we are not yet prepared for. Meanwhile, on the philosophical front, theorists are reimagining concepts of self, agency, and identity. If consciousness is not confined to the brain, if it exists in interaction with fields that stretch across time and space, then individuality itself becomes fluid. We are still distinct, but our experiences may be shaped by patterns far larger than our bodies. This introduces the idea of distributed consciousness, a state in which awareness is not centralized in one point but spread across a network. In a way, this reflects how field theory describes particles, not as solid dots but as fluctuations extending across regions. In this model, a single conscious moment might involve contributions from multiple field regions, some within the brain, others perhaps beyond it. And that opens another avenue, collective consciousness. If individuals are resonating with the same fields, and those fields are coherent across space, then groups of people might influence or be influenced by shared patterns of awareness. This has implications for psychology, sociology, and even geopolitics. Mass behavior, group identity, even cultural shifts might be shaped by dynamics in the field. There's also the matter of healing. If consciousness is linked to field configurations, then mental states, thoughts, emotions, intentions could subtly influence physical systems through the field itself. This isn't magic. It's a question of field interaction. Subtle shifts in field coherence might modulate biochemical processes, hormonal cascades, even immune responses. Researchers in psychoneuroimmunology have already shown that beliefs and perceptions can alter physiology. The next step is understanding whether these effects are mediated through quantum fields. If so, we might be entering an age where mental health, physical health, and quantum physics are no longer separate disciplines but different expressions of the same underlying reality. What's emerging is not a single answer, but a constellation of possibilities. And they all point toward a future where our understanding of consciousness is broader, deeper, and far more integrated than anything before. We're not just observing this shift, we're participating in it. Every new experiment, every fresh theory, every technological leap adds another thread to the tapestry. And we're only at the beginning. Future conferences and symposia are already laying the groundwork for a new science, one that treats consciousness as real, testable, and fundamental. Journals are publishing interdisciplinary studies that bridge neuroscience, physics, and philosophy. Research grants are flowing toward projects that once would have been dismissed as fringe. This doesn't mean consensus has been reached. Far from it. There is debate. There is disagreement. And that's exactly how progress happens. Science is not built on certainty. It's built on bold questions and careful steps. And right now, those questions are pointing in the same direction, toward a deeper understanding of consciousness through the lens of field theory. As we move forward, it's crucial to stay grounded. Quantum field theory is not a shortcut to enlightenment. It's not a catch-all explanation, but it is a doorway. And when used with rigor and imagination, it allows us to explore the most elusive aspects of experience with the tools of science. Not just as observers, but as participants. We are standing at the edge of something vast, not just in terms of outer space, but inner space. The frontier is not just out there in particle colliders and deep space telescopes. It's within every moment of awareness, every shift of attention, every act of perception. Consciousness is not a bystander in the cosmic story. It's part of the plot. And this shift from seeing consciousness as a side effect to recognizing it as central is the real revolution. It's one that will reshape not just science, but technology, medicine, ethics, and even how we define what it means to be human. Because once we accept that consciousness might not be confined to the skull, that it might resonate with the quantum fields that form the very basis of existence, we begin to see ourselves differently. Not as isolated minds, but as patterns in a living, vibrating field of reality. The quantum frontier isn't just a place. It's a state of awareness. And as we learn to navigate it, we may discover that the mysteries of consciousness were never separate from the rest of the universe. They were always hidden in plain vibration, waiting to be recognized, studied, and finally understood. What if the universe has never been what we thought it was? Not a machine, not a collection of separate objects floating in space, but a dynamic process, where the observer and the observed are intertwined in a field of continuous influence. Quantum field theory has already reframed how we look at matter and energy. But when we apply its ideas to consciousness, something profound happens. We begin to recognize that the framework of existence itself might be different from what centuries of thought have led us to believe. This shift isn't just theoretical, it has practical consequences. It challenges us to rethink everything from science and technology to ethics and spirituality. Because when reality is understood as a field of relationships, nothing remains untouched. Not our minds, not our tools, not even our sense of purpose. At its foundation, quantum field theory tells us that particles are not standalone units. They are ripples in underlying fields. These fields extend through all of space. Their properties define what exists, how it moves, and how it interacts. Everything emerges from them. When consciousness is viewed through this lens, it too becomes more than a biological phenomenon. It becomes part of the structure of the field itself. This perspective transforms our view of reality. Instead of existing in a world of objects that happen to be conscious, we start to see consciousness as woven into the very medium of existence. This raises a compelling question. If everything is fundamentally field-based, and if consciousness interacts with these fields, then can consciousness influence the nature of what is real? Such a question stretches beyond traditional science, but it does so without abandoning scientific integrity. We now have a framework for exploring phenomena that once sat outside the reach of physics. These include synchronicity, intention-based effects, and even anomalous cognition. None of these require us to believe in the supernatural. They simply invite us to expand the definitions we've used to categorize experience. This has deep implications for ethics. In a classical worldview, individuals are isolated, separate entities. Actions affect others only through direct contact. But in a field-based model, separation is an illusion. Everything is already entangled metaphorically and perhaps literally. If our thoughts, emotions, and actions generate patterns within a shared field, then responsibility takes on a new meaning. Our inner world is not private. It radiates, participates, and it has consequences beyond the boundaries of our own lives. This doesn't just apply to individuals. Entire systems, social, ecological, economic, can be understood as field configurations. Their stability or collapse depends on coherence. Harmony within the field leads to balance. Disruption creates chaos. This principle is already reflected in complex system science, but quantum field theory offers a deeper explanation for why such dynamics exist in the first place. Nowhere is this more relevant than in our relationship with the planet. Traditional approaches to environmentalism frame Earth as a resource to be managed. But if consciousness and matter are expressions of the same fields, then Earth is not merely alive, it is aware. Not in a human sense, but as a self-organizing, self-sensing system. Protecting the planet then becomes more than a necessity. It becomes a form of communion, a recognition that we are not above nature, we are expressions of it. Technology, too, stands to be transformed. Quantum computing is only the beginning. When devices are designed not just to manipulate bits of data but to work with the structure of fields themselves, we enter an entirely new age. Machines could be created to detect patterns of coherence within consciousness. Interfaces might be developed that respond to subtle changes in intention or awareness. This could revolutionize everything from communication to healing. Healthcare in particular could benefit. Already, there is growing evidence that states of mind influence physical health. But what if this influence is mediated through quantum fields? If so, new therapies could be designed that enhance field coherence. Devices might amplify constructive interference patterns. Meditation could be paired with targeted frequency interventions. Illness might be understood not merely as biological malfunction, but as dissonance within the field configuration of the body-mind system. Artificial intelligence also enters this picture. Today's AI systems process symbols. They recognize patterns, but they do not understand. They do not experience. However, if the architecture of consciousness is based on field dynamics, and if those dynamics can be replicated or engaged with technologically, then the gap between artificial and natural intelligence could narrow. Not through mimicry, but through resonance. Such developments would demand profound caution. Creating machines that operate on field principles means working with the same foundation that gives rise to awareness. If we do not understand these principles fully, we risk unintended consequences. Ethical frameworks would need to evolve, not just to govern behavior, but to guide inquiry itself. Spirituality, too, is transformed, not by negating tradition, but by providing a language that bridges ancient intuition and modern science. Many wisdom traditions have long described a reality where all things are connected, where mind influences matter, and where awareness extends beyond the individual. Quantum field theory does not validate every mystical claim, but it does provide a model in which such claims are not automatically dismissed. Instead, they become hypotheses, testable, revisable, and potentially integrable into a unified understanding of reality. This unified view changes how we see ourselves. Identity is no longer tied solely to the body or the personality. It is recognized as a process, a pattern of coherence within the field. The self is not a fixed point, but a waveform. It arises, stabilizes, and dissolves. It is both local and non-local. This can be unsettling, but it is also liberating, because it means that change is not only possible, it is inherent to the nature of being. Education could also be reshaped. Rather than treating learning as the transfer of information, it could be seen as the tuning of awareness. Students would not just absorb facts, they would learn to recognize and work with field dynamics. Attention would be valued not only for what it captures, but for what it influences. Focus becomes a creative act. Inquiry becomes a kind of field alignment. Social structures would change as well. If we begin to see collective behavior as patterns in a shared field, then policies, institutions, and communities would be evaluated based on the coherence they generate. Leadership would not be about control. It would be about guiding resonance. The goal would not be domination, but harmony. Even conflict might be addressed differently. In a field model, tension arises from interference patterns. By understanding the underlying fields, it may be possible to resolve disputes not just through negotiation, but by shifting the field configurations that sustain opposition. This doesn't eliminate conflict, but it offers new ways of engaging with it, ways that go deeper than surface disagreements. Ultimately, the application of quantum field theory to consciousness is not just a scientific endeavor. It is a civilizational pivot, a reorientation of how we understand the world and our place within it. It doesn't require abandoning the material. It simply expands it to include the experiential. This is not about turning physics into mysticism or mysticism into physics. It's about recognizing that reality is richer than we thought. That consciousness is not a footnote. It's part of the fundamental grammar of existence. And that means every domain of life, science, art, ethics, governance, must be reimagined in light of this insight. We are at the threshold of a new paradigm, one that does not divide the world into matter and mind, subject and object, science and spirit, but one that sees all of these as facets of a single, unified field. A field that vibrates with information, energy, and awareness. This shift won't happen all at once. Paradigms take time to change, but it has already begun. In laboratories, universities, and think tanks. In books, conversations, and quiet moments of reflection. A new language is forming. A new map is being drawn. And you are part of it. Not as a passive viewer, but as a participant in this unfolding reality. Every thought you think, every choice you make, every question you ask sends ripples through the field. You are not separate from this transformation. You are one of its causes. The journey ahead will not be easy. There will be resistance. There will be confusion. But there will also be breakthroughs, moments of clarity, insight, and connection that reveal just how much more there is to know, to feel, to become. Quantum field theory has shown us that the universe is not built from things, but from patterns, from relationships, from fields, and consciousness, far from being an accident of evolution, may be one of the most essential expressions of those patterns. This is the new paradigm, not a belief but a possibility, not a dogma but an invitation to think differently, to live more consciously, and to help shape a future where science and spirit are no longer in conflict, but in resonance.